Now, from an FFT perspective, we want to bring this knowledge to a way of looking at the functional and multi-systemic perspective of thinking about youth in a relational way. So let's think about how this works. Let's take a big perspective outside of the role of trauma. Just think about youth behaviors, whether they be good or bad. Clearly, those behaviors are connected to the outside system, meaning to peers and school, the pull of community and extended family. Very much like gravity, those particular systems around the youth's behavior have an impact through expectations and through the patterns and the way in which their family and extended family work. Now, in foster care and in regular families or in intact families, there is also a family. In this case, we'll talk about it as foster care or permanency families. And in those families, it is a collection of individuals that the youth is involved with that has at its core three particular things. It has a set of common patterns, meaning ways in which they work things out. It has a set of common meanings that they apply to behaviors. And they get glued together through what we're going to call relational functions. Now, when you put those together, the behavior of youths is inexorably tied to the meanings, patterns, and functions in the core psychosocial history in which they, or psychosocial system in which they live. So it means that this connection between the youth behavior and the family system is the way in which all of them, the youth and the foster or permanency parents, come to understand the motives, the expectations, and the behavior of other people in the family. It is the core way in which they come to, through particular skills and behaviors, work together. And it is the core way in which they attach to one another in what we'll call, as we move through the training and through FFT, relational functions. Now, an important question is, where do problems come from? Because problems are very complex, and they're not just about current things, as the trauma focus has helped inform us. So if you think a little bit about what is it that individuals, be it the teen, be it the foster parent or the permanency parent, brings to those family relationships. Each person brings a sense of the past in terms of types of relationships, kind of what we call where they come from or their core relational contexts. They also bring a biological component to the table, and they bring a context, past events and past traumatic events that they bring to the table, so to speak, of everyday functioning. And within that table, or on that table, those things that they bring have an impact on the family in three core areas. One, the meanings that they place on events, the core behavior patterns, and the way in which they're attached to one another, or the glue that holds them together. So let's think of this in a rather unique way. Let's think of this in the way of how do families get stuck, or how would a foster family and a youth, or a permanency family and a youth get stuck. So there's some sort of challenging behavior that they have difficulty in overcoming, and that behavior over time becomes part of the daily pattern of the family. And the first thing that occurs is everybody in the family begins to think about what it means to them. Now, from our FFT perspective, we'll call those problem definitions, or our ideas and beliefs and attributions about why the challenging behavior. In this particular case, each of these has one part, each of these attributions has a part in terms of the who did it and what the problem is, what the intention behind that is. That's kind of a made-up belief that we have, and why that's an important thing. There's an emotional reaction connected to that problem definition in the sense of either negativity or blame, anger, and hurt that comes from how one defines the problem. And then there are a set of behaviors that make sense in terms of overcoming that problem. So for example, if you happen to believe that your child was being disrespectful, that may be important to you because you were raised in a way in which respect was a critical thing that kids gave parents. And if you're not getting that, then that means that that relationship is not as it should be. The emotional reaction might be one of negativity, and then you may focus your behavior on helping teach that youth to be more respectful. From a different perspective, that same behavior could be seen as assertiveness, as autonomy and as sticking up for oneself. But it is in the problem definition of the person that it becomes very, very difficult, because it goes from what it is to what its meaning is to the person. Now, the second part of what goes on in terms of how trauma affects a family is in terms of how it affects the daily patterns between family members. So let me give you an example of how patterns in families work. Let's start this way. Imagine a foster mother, Ange, and her foster son, Peter. And she says, Peter, have you done, and it almost doesn't matter what she says next, whatever. You're getting behind. You should take some responsibility. And, this escalates the longer he doesn't answer. She continues to talk. And Peter then says, whatever, I'm going to go out. I'll be home. And she jumps in very quickly to say, there's no going out for you. It just isn't good for you. You can't say no to all those friends. And he says very quickly, at least I have friends. And he goes out. Now, what that illustrates is a common escalating interaction between a caregiver and a youth. And it's a very common escalation in terms of it's a simple request followed by almost blowing it off and escalation of the parents. But in families, patterns are not that simple. Because in this particular family, look what happens once Peter goes. Ange then says to her husband, I can't do anything with him. And, you don't really help me. I'd really like your support. And the stepfather, who may be watching television or doing something else, he listens and he listens and he listens and finally says something that he really shouldn't, which is that given he's a stepfather, he says, well, maybe he wasn't raised right. That escalation really hurts Ange. And she's hurt by his comment. She goes to her room, feels worried, and she struggles. He continues to watch whatever he's watching, maybe the football game, but he continues to worry about his wife and internally gets more angry at Peter. Now look at the pattern between Ange and her husband and Peter's stepfather, or in this particular case, it could be a foster parent. Look what happens. She asks for help. He listens, doesn't provide it, escalates the experience. She gets hurt. He gets angry. Well, as we know, family patterns are even more complicated than this. So what occurs next is what happened when Peter comes home. He comes home late, and the stepfather does what he was asked, which is he intervenes. He's usually quiet and says, hey, you need to stop this. It hurts your mother. Peter, in very flowery language, tells him to leave him alone. Again, notice what occurs at a core level. The stepfather has very little influence in this particular pattern with Peter. And then let's finish the pattern, which is what occurs between mom and Peter afterwards. She hears the ruckus and goes to him and says, look, I'm really worried. And he says, Mom, I can take it. He softens. She softens. They connect in a way in which she's able to be straightforward and honest. And at the end of the whole pattern, Peter says, Mom, I can handle it. Just keep the bastard away from me. He feels better. Mom feels better. And the behavior and the anger is directed at the stepfather. So you can see through this complicated pattern that what you would hear if you were to ask Peter, Ange, and the stepfather what was going on, Peter would give it a problem definition of, it's my stepfather. The stepfather may give the problem definition of, it's Peter, and the mother would probably say, it's both of them. Neither of them help me in the way that they can.